here. Thank you all for coming to this reading to celebrate Kelsey Street's 40 years of publishing experimental writing by women and collaboration between poets and visual artists. My name is Patricia Dienstfrey, and with Rena Rosenwasser, I'm the co-founder of the press. While I was thinking about how to say something about 40 years of publishing in just a few minutes, I decided to speculate how someone visiting Earth twice in the early 70s and in 2014 might recognize the press then and now. In the 1970s, Kelsey Street was composed of 6 writers who met as a collective in each other's homes. Our poetry conversations centered on the women's poetry and fiction being brought out by newly established feminist presses. Shameless Hussey's reprints of George Sand's prose, Five Trees' beautiful letterpress editions, one of which I looked at just recently, 2 poems by H.D., the poet and the dancer. We were also excited by articles published in new feminist magazines like Signs and Feminist Studies. The enjoyment of good food has sustained Kelsey Street through every decade. However, in the 1970s, if we were meeting at Rena's, we would be eating a dish from a classical French cookbook with an amount of butter in the recipe that would now probably be against the law. Now our dinners before meetings are still amazing, but are more likely to be centered around produce brought in from the local farmers markets. We still meet in each other's homes. The number of press members in the 70s was around 5 or 6. The number in the past few years has been more like 8, 9, or 10, even 12 at one point. An expansion that came about as we developed an internet presence. More members were needed to maintain an updated newsletter, blog, calendar, author recordings, and other audio features. In the 70s, we were all in our 20s and 30s. Now the age of press members spans 5 decades, from the 30s through the 70s. What about Kelsey Street would the visitor find the same? We still publish experimental writing. We still publish a racially and ethnically inclusive list, over the years adding gender inclusiveness to our editorial guidelines. We continue to bring out an average of 2 to 3 books annually. We still focus on women writers, because while published women poets are no longer a rarity in the United States, we live in a global society in which women are treated as second-rate, as not men, in a world of the poet he. We still make room for first books to give poets the first step from manuscript into print, which many publishers avoid, unwilling to take risks bringing out writers who are unknown. Kelsey Street continues to be a completely volunteer organization, fueled by insane passions for books and poetry, and by an immense creative energy that spills over into the 25-hour day in which so much creative work in the arts takes place. Finally, I see an underlining poetics in Kelsey Street's editorial guidelines that has shaped our book list from the first book we published to the most recent. As I said, in 1974, we set up an editorial policy that was inclusive racially and ethnically. It arose out of an awareness that poetry, in its essence, is inclusive, racially, culturally, nationally, internationally. The first book we published was Neurosweet, the poetry and translation of an Italian poet, Margherita Guidacci. The subject matter was her hospitalization for mental illness in a society of male-defined norms. Our newest edition is entitled Premonition, by the distinguished poet, screenwriter, and artist Atala Adnan, who's made her home throughout her long life in Beirut, Lebanon, Paris, France, and the Bay Area in the United States. Her subject matter has always been immediately recognizable as universal: beauty, love, and war. most specifically the Civil War in the country of her birth, Lebanon. It is such a pleasure to have had a chance, writing up these notes, to place Kelsey Street's 40-year history between these two books. We're excited we could produce Premonition in time to bring it here to be available at our book table, which in book fair speak is N32, shared with Apogee Press. Please stop by when you're in the bookstore browsing. 6 of our 8 members are here. I'd like to introduce them. Steffi Drews coordinates events, including this reading for AWP, keeping us all on track, and handles the press's PR. Anna Morrison is web manager, archivist, bookkeeper, and an editor for our first book series called Firsts, with an exclamation point. M.G. Roberts is our publicist and has just produced an anthology entitled Nests and Strangers, essays by 4 Asian American women on 4 Asian American Kelsey Street Press poets, which is due out this spring. Val Whitty and Ramsey Breslin are current members who could not come here. Both have made invaluable contributions to the press. The 2 remaining members, Rena Rosenwasser and Hazel White, are reading this afternoon, and I'll introduce them soon. But I'd like to acknowledge the members who are here and thank them for their huge contributions to Kelsey Street and to the poetry community. So I'd like them to stand. Anna, and Steffi, and MG. In my introductions this afternoon's readers, I want to say a few words about how each came to Kelsey Street. Rena Rosenwasser is the other remaining active founding member of the press. We met in 1973 in Berkeley Poets Co-op, a drop-in poetry workshop. We just soon discovered we were drawn to the same early modernist innovators, the better-known writers such as Stein and H.D., but also the lesser-known such as Juna Barnes and Violette Leduc. And both of us were inspired by early 20th century women-financed and run small presses and bookstores that published and supported some of the most important writing of the 20th century, new then and in the canon now. We also shared a passion for letterpress printing. Both of us enjoyed hours spent mixing ink to the color we wanted, choosing from among the most delicious rag papers, and getting the imprint on the paper just right. Barbara Guest, in her essays on writing in Forces of Imagination, which Kelsey Street had the great pleasure of publishing in 2003, evokes the surrealists as the inhabitants of a creative atmosphere of magical rites, when all the arts evolved around one another. A central plaza with roads which led, as she puts it, from palette to quill to clef. For Rena, Barbara's magical world of interconnected arts extends to landscape, to film, to her first espresso of the day, wherever she may be with her partner Penny. She travels the roads with a playful spirit and with a core commitment to the arts, artists, and to the creative process. In the title poem of her most recent book of poetry, Elevators, published by Kelsey Street, Rem Koolhaas, Louis Sullivan, the Manhattan Indians, Walt Whitman, Woolworth, Gustav Eiffel, and Otis of the Elevator make appearances. A few lines from Elevators. When my body goes up, everyone else is left behind. The century begins. It's my great pleasure to introduce Rena Rosenwasser.